That little girl is mine. Those 4 words would tear apart everything Vincent, Gotti Malone, had built in 20 years of ruling Chicago's underworld. The black Cadillac exploded in a symphony of shattering glass and screaming metal. Bullets punched through the reinforced doors like they were tissue paper. 3 magazines worth of death delivered with surgical precision outside Rossi's Steakhouse. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and really, I'm curious. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Tommy's body jerked like a puppet with cut strings before slumping against the dashboard, his blood painting the leather seats crimson. Gotti felt the impact before the pain. Chest, shoulder, the hot punch of lead tearing through muscle and bone. He threw himself out of the vehicle, leaving a trail of blood across Southside asphalt that glittered under the streetlights like rubies. Polly's return fire created just enough chaos. Sirens wailed in the distance as Gotti was dragged into another car, his $1,000 suit transforming into a sodden mess of fabric and gore. The Calabrese family had finally made their move. 20 years of building an empire on fear, 20 years of crushing anyone who dared challenge him, and someone had gotten close enough to put him in the ground. Chicago Memorial Hospital's emergency bay lit up as the car screeched to a stop. Polly and 2 soldiers hauled Gotti out, their boss barely conscious, blood pooling on the concrete. Hospital staff froze at the sight of armed men bursting through the automatic doors, weapons barely concealed under jackets, turning the sterile ER into a war zone. Ever wonder what it takes to break an unbreakable man? The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps overhead. Nurses swarmed the gurney, shouting medical jargon Gotti's morphine-hazed brain couldn't process. Blood pressure dropping. Possible cardiac tamponade. Get him 2 or 3 now. The ceiling tiles blurred past as they wheeled him through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and desperation. Then Gotti saw her. Sharon Jenkins. Teal scrubs. Nurse's badge clipped to her chest. Hair pulled back in a ponytail that revealed the graceful curve of her neck, a neck he'd once kissed in a Vegas chapel 10 years ago. The woman he'd married drunk and divorced sober. The woman who demanded he choose between her and the life. The woman whose heart he'd shattered when he chose the throne. She froze mid-step when their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the chaos of the emergency room fell away. Just Sharon and Gotti, connected by a past soaked in regret and rage. Her jaw tightened. She looked away, but not before Gotti saw something in her expression that cut deeper than any bullet. Fear. But Sharon wasn't alone. Clutching her hand was a little girl, maybe 4 years old, with dark curls cascading over small shoulders. The child's eyes locked onto Gotti with unsettling intensity. Eyes the exact shade of amber he saw every morning in the mirror. Those impossible, unmistakable eyes. "Mommy, why is that man bleeding?" The little girl's voice cut through the medical chaos like a knife through silk. Clear. Innocent. Devastating. Sharon's face drained of color. She tried to pull the child away, to shield her from the violence and blood, but Gotti's mind had already started calculating. The timeline. The resemblance. The way Sharon looked terrified, not for him dying, but of him discovering something she'd kept hidden. "Ma'am, you need to clear this area," a nurse began. Sharon didn't argue. She pulled the little girl down a side corridor, disappearing from view like smoke. But it was too late. Gotti had seen enough. Gunshot wounds to the chest and shoulder. Possible hemothorax. The trauma surgeon's voice barely registered. "We're losing him. Push 2 units of O-negative." The ore doors slammed shut with mechanical finality. Darkness swallowed Gotti whole, but one thought pounded through his dying consciousness louder than his fading heartbeat. That little girl is mine. 16 hours later. Gotti's eyes opened to the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors. His chest felt like someone had parked a truck on it, every breath a negotiation with agony. Tubes snaked from his arms. Bandages wrapped his torso so tight he could barely move. The private room was dim, curtains drawn, the only light coming from the machines keeping him alive. Polly sat in the corner, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. The moment Gotti's eyes focused, his second-in-command leaned forward. "Boss." "Thank Christ. Doc said you flatlined twice on the table. Lost so much blood they had to. Find Sharon Jenkins." Gotti's voice came out as a rasp, raw from the breathing tube. "Find out everything about that kid." Polly's eyebrows shot up. "Boss, we got bigger problems. The Calabrese family is regrouping. Word on the street is they're planning." "I don't care." The words came out cold, final, brooking no argument. Gotti's amber eyes burned with an intensity that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with a truth he couldn't yet name. "Find her. Find out about that little girl. I want a full dossier on my table in 6 hours. Where Sharon lives, where she works, who she talks to." Gotti paused, his voice dropping to something almost vulnerable. "And I want to know that child's birthday." Polly studied his boss for a long moment. In 20 years of service, he'd never seen this expression on Gotti's face. Not fear, not rage. Something more dangerous. Desperation. "On it, boss." Polly stood, already pulling out his phone. 6 hours. As his second-in-command left, Gotti stared at the ceiling tiles and tried to calculate the impossible math. The divorce was finalized 5 years ago. The little girl looked about 4. The final fight, the screaming match that ended everything. Sharon had tried to tell him something that night. He'd been too drunk, too angry, too consumed by choosing power over everything else to listen. She'd been trying to tell him she was pregnant. And he'd thrown her out. Told her he'd never bring a child into his world of blood and betrayal. Screamed that she was weak for even suggesting it. Sharon had walked away that night carrying his daughter in her womb. She'd chosen to raise that little girl alone rather than expose her to the monster he'd become. For 5 years, Gotti had believed Sharon left because she couldn't handle what he was. Now, lying in a hospital bed with bullets dug out of his chest, he understood the truth. She'd left because she was strong enough to protect what he couldn't. The question wasn't whether Vincent Gotti Malone would survive the assassination attempt. The question was whether he could survive the truth. The emergency room corridor became a tunnel of sound and light. Fluorescent bulbs buzzing like electrical hornets, medical equipment screaming urgent rhythms, voices overlapping in a symphony of controlled panic. Gotti's gurney rattled beneath him as nurses and doctors swarmed like worker bees around their dying queen. Type O negative. We need 4-unit stat. BP's dropping, 80/40 and falling. Get respiratory down here now. His sat's at 86. Gotti's consciousness flickered like a dying light bulb. In. Out. The ceiling tiles blurred into abstract patterns. Pain radiated from his chest in waves that made breathing feel like swallowing broken glass. This was how it ended then. Not in a spectacular shootout, not standing over a rival's corpse, but bleeding out on a hospital gurney surrounded by strangers in scrubs. Then he saw her, and his heart stopped colder than any bullet could manage. Sharon Jenkins. 10 years collapsed into a single moment of recognition. The woman he'd married in that tacky Vegas chapel at 3 a.m, both of them drunk on champagne and possibility. The woman who'd looked at him like he could be something more than Chicago's most feared enforcer. The woman he'd divorced 5 years later when she'd committed the unforgivable sin of demanding he choose between her and the empire he was building on corpses and fear. The woman whose heart he'd shattered when he chose power. She stood near the nurse's station in teal scrubs, a badge clipped to her chest identifying her as S. Jenkins, RN. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, revealing the exhaustion etched into her face, the kind that came from too many double shifts and not enough sleep. But it was her eyes that Gotti recognized instantly, even through the morphine haze clouding his vision. Those eyes had once looked at him with love so fierce it terrified him. Then came disappointment that cut deeper than any knife. Finally, nothing at all. The worst look of all. Sharon froze mid-step when she saw him. For a split second, the entire emergency room fell away. The shouting nurses, the beeping monitors, the smell of blood and antiseptic. Just Sharon and Gotti, connected by a past neither had fully escaped. Their eyes locked across the chaotic space. Recognition flared in her gaze, followed immediately by something that looked like fear. Not fear for him dying. Sharon had probably imagined his death 1,000 times after what he'd done to her. No, this was different. This was fear of something else entirely. Gotti's voice came out as barely more than a rasp, raw from the breathing tube they jammed down his throat during surgery. Each word felt like scraping his vocal cords with sandpaper. Polly blinked, thrown by the non sequitur. "Boss, find Sharon Jenkins," Gotti repeated, his amber eyes burning with an intensity that had nothing to do with fever. "Find out everything about that kid." Polly's eyebrows shot up. "Boss, we need to talk about who ordered the hit. The Calabrese family is regrouping. Word on the street is they're planning another." "I don't care." The words came out cold, final, carrying the weight of absolute command that had kept men loyal to Gotti for 20 years. Polly's mouth snapped shut. "Find her. Now." 6 hours later, Polly returned carrying a manila folder that would detonate what remained of Vincent Malone's carefully constructed world. He entered the ICU room without knocking, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. The folder looked innocuous. Standard office supply store issue, the kind that held tax documents or medical records. But the weight with which Polly held it suggested something far more dangerous. "Got what you asked for, boss." Polly's voice was carefully neutral as he approached the bed. Gotti struggled to sit up straighter, ignoring the screaming protest from his chest. Every movement felt like tearing stitches, but he reached for the folder with hands that trembled despite his best efforts at control. Inside were documents that rewrote his entire history. Sharon Jenkins, age 34. Color photograph clipped to the first page, a professional headshot, probably from her hospital ID. She looked older than he remembered, tiny lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago, but still beautiful in that understated way that had first caught his attention in a Chicago bar a lifetime ago. Occupation: nurse practitioner, Brightside Children's Clinic, Oak Park. She'd finished her degree then. During their marriage, she'd been working toward it, taking night classes while waitressing during the day. He'd mocked her for it once, told her it was a waste of time when she had access to his money. The memory tasted like ash. Residence: 2847, Maple Avenue, Oak Park. Living under maiden name. A rental, according to the property records Polly had pulled. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, modest neighborhood. Nothing like the penthouse they'd shared when they were married, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River that Gotti had bought to prove he'd made it. Marital status: single mother. Dependents: 1. Susan Marie Jenkins. Gotti's breath caught, sending a spike of pain through his damaged chest. Age: 4 years, 7 months. Date of birth: March 15th. His hands shook as he did the math he already knew by heart. March 15th. Exactly 9 months after the final explosive fight that had ended their marriage. The night Sharon had packed her bags while he'd screamed himself hoarse. The night he'd chosen the empire over everything else. The night his daughter was conceived. The next page contained surveillance photographs that Polly must have obtained within the last few hours. Sharon and Susan at a park, captured in telephoto detail. The little girl sat on a swing, mid-arc, her dark curls flying behind her, mouth open in delighted laughter. Sharon stood behind her, pushing, smiling in a way Gotti had never seen directed at him. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Gotti's vision blurred. He blinked hard, refusing to acknowledge the burning in his eyes. Those amber eyes staring out from the photograph. That smile, the Malone smile, cocky and bright, the one his own father had passed to him. The way she held her head, tilted slightly to the left, exactly like Gotti did when he was thinking. His DNA written all over her face in undeniable detail. The realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. Sharon had been pregnant when he threw her out of his life. Memories surfaced through the haze of rage and whiskey that had dominated that final night. Sharon standing in the doorway of their bedroom, suitcase half-packed, crying. Her hand resting on her stomach. He'd noticed it at the time but hadn't registered what it meant. Her mouth opening to speak. "Vincent, I need to tell you something." But he'd cut her off, his voice rising to a roar fueled by 3 glasses of scotch and the intoxicating rush of having just secured the Southside territories. "I don't want to hear it. You think I don't know what you're going to say? That you can't handle this life? That you want me to go straight, get some 9-to-5 job, become some pathetic suburban husband? No, that's not. I will never bring a child into this world, Sharon." The words exploded out of him like bullets. Never. This world of blood and betrayal. You think I'd curse some innocent kid with that? You're weak for even suggesting it. She'd flinched like he'd struck her. Her hand had dropped from her stomach. The tears had stopped, replaced by something colder, more final. "You're right," she'd said quietly. "I am weak. Too weak to watch you become this." And she'd walked away, carrying his daughter in her womb, choosing to raise Susan alone rather than expose her to the violence that consumed him. For 5 years, Gotti had believed Sharon left because she couldn't handle what he was. A mafia boss, a man who ruled through fear and maintained power through violence. He'd told himself she was too soft, too naive, too suburban for the empire he was building. Hayes tapped the photograph. Your wife, ex-wife, was leaving her nursing class at the community college. Wrong place, wrong time. She saw the whole thing. Gotti's mind raced back to that night. Sharon coming home late, shaking, pale as death. He'd known immediately something was wrong. She'd seen something she shouldn't have. He'd made her swear to forget it. Told her that silence was the only thing keeping her alive. Made her an accessory through that silence. It was one of the things that had poisoned their marriage beyond repair. "You touch her," Gotti said, his voice dropping to something lethal, "and I will make you disappear in ways that will keep your fellow cops looking for decades." "I'm offering you a deal," Hayes interrupted, pulling out a legal document and setting it on top of the photographs. Official DOJ letterhead. Dense paragraphs of legalese. Testify against the Calabrese family. Help us take down your competition. Provide evidence, wear a wire, whatever we need. Do that, and I'll make sure Sharon's testimony is never needed. Her name never comes up. The murder she witnessed gets attributed to unknown assailants. Hayes leaned back, letting the offer hang in the air. "Refuse," he continued quietly, "and I'll subpoena her. Drag her into federal court. Put her on the stand in front of every criminal organization in Chicago. Make her testify about what she saw, who ordered it, and how you coerced her into silence. The quiet suburban life she's built for your daughter? Destroyed. Susan will grow up knowing her mother helped cover up a murder, knowing her father is a killer." The detective stood, gathering his photographs back into the briefcase with methodical precision. "You've got 48 hours to think about it, Vincent. Protect your empire, or protect your daughter. Can't have both." Hayes headed for the door, pausing with his hand on the handle. Choose wisely. Sharon didn't run. Against every survival instinct screaming at her to pack up Susan and disappear into another state, another life, another identity, she walked into Gotti's hospital room 3 days after the shooting. Susan was safe with her mother across town, coloring pictures and blissfully unaware of the war about to erupt. Sharon came alone. And she came ready for war. The door clicked shut behind her with mechanical finality. Gotti, still pale and weak from surgery, sat up straighter in the hospital bed despite the obvious pain it caused him. His amber eyes, Susan's eyes, tracked her movements with the focus of a predator. For a long moment neither spoke. The only sounds were the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the distant chaos of the hospital beyond the closed door. Sharon broke the silence first. You don't get to know her. Her voice came out steady despite the fear flickering in her eyes like candlelight in wind. You made your choice 5 years ago. You chose this life. You chose violence. I won't let you poison her the way you poisoned everything else you touched. Gotti's voice came out rough, damaged from the breathing tube. She's my blood. Your blood is what almost got you killed. Sharon's composure cracked like ice under pressure, fury breaking through the carefully maintained calm. She took a step closer to the bed, her hands trembling, not from fear but from rage held back too long. Your blood is what stained Chicago's streets. Her voice rose, years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. Your blood is what turns little boys into killers and destroys families. Your blood gets people executed in alleys and dumped in rivers. I won't let that be her legacy. She deserves better than a father who rules through fear and dies bleeding on restaurant parking lots. I have a right. You have no rights. Sharon stepped even closer, trembling with rage and heartbreak and something deeper. The primal fury of a mother protecting her child. You told me you'd never bring a child into this world. You screamed it at me. Those exact words. I will never bring a child into this world of blood and betrayal. So I left. I raised her alone. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. I worked double shifts at the hospital while pregnant, my feet swelling so bad I could barely stand. I went without sleep for months when she was a newborn, rocking her in a 1-bedroom apartment with peeling paint because it was all I could afford. I went without food sometimes, actually hungry Vincent, so she could have formula and diapers. Tears streamed down Sharon's face now, but her voice grew stronger, not weaker. I did all of that just to keep her safe from you and everything you represent. I built a life where she can sleep without fear, where she can go to parks without bodyguards, where she doesn't have to know her father orders people killed before breakfast. You think I'll let you destroy that because biology? Sharon. No. She cut him off. You don't get to speak. You don't get to explain. You made your choice when you threw me out. You made your choice every day for 5 years when you didn't look for me, didn't wonder where I went, didn't care enough to find out. Susan is mine. My daughter. Not yours. Gotti waited until her fury spent itself, until she stood there breathing hard, tears streaming down her face, fists clenched at her sides. Then he played the card he'd been holding, the one that would change everything. The Calabrese family knows about her now. Sharon's blood ran cold. The color drained from her face. They saw her at the hospital, Gotti continued, his voice deadly serious, stripped of everything except brutal truth. They know she's mine. Frank Calabrese has been trying to destroy me for 2 years, and I just survived an assassination attempt that killed my bodyguard and nearly put me in the ground. He paused, letting that sink in. You think keeping her from me will keep her safe? Gotti's amber eyes bored into hers. They'll use her to get to me whether I'm in her life or not. She's a target now, Sharon. The moment she stood in that emergency room holding your hand, she became a weapon they can use against me. At least if I'm close, if I know where she is, if I can put protection on her, I can keep her alive. Sharon's legs went weak. She grabbed the back of the visitor's chair to steady herself, her mind racing through scenarios she'd spent 5 years successfully avoiding. "You're lying," she whispered, but there was no conviction in it. "I wish I was." 48 hours later, Sharon's worst nightmare materialized with the brutal efficiency of violence she'd spent 5 years trying to escape. She returned home after a 12-hour shift at the clinic, exhausted down to her bones, her mind already planning dinner and bedtime routines. The moment she turned onto her street, something felt wrong, a primal instinct that made the hair on her neck stand up. The apartment door was ajar, hanging crooked on broken hinges. Sharon's heart stopped. Time crystallized into sharp, terrible clarity. "Mom!" She dropped her purse on the walkway, running toward the entrance. "Susan!" Inside, her world had been torn apart. Her mother lay unconscious on the living room floor, a dark purple bruise blooming across her temple like a poisonous flower. Blood trickled from her hairline. The apartment had been ransacked with methodical brutality. Furniture overturned, couch cushions slashed open, drawers emptied and thrown across the floor. Photographs torn from frames and scattered like playing cards. Susan's coloring books ripped to pieces. But Susan was gone. "Mom! Mom, wake up!" Sharon dropped to her knees, checking for a pulse with trembling fingers. Steady. Strong. Thank God. She grabbed her phone, hands shaking so badly she could barely dial 911. The phone vibrated in her palm before she could complete the call. Unknown number. Sharon's stomach dropped into freefall as she opened the message. The photograph loaded with agonizing slowness, pixel by pixel revealing horror. Susan, sitting in the back seat of a black SUV. Her little hands were clasped together in her lap, the way she did when she was scared and trying to be brave. Tears streamed down her face, carving wet tracks through her cheeks. Her eyes, those Amber Malone eyes, were wide with terror. The text beneath the image appeared letter by letter, each character a nail being driven into Sharon's heart. "Gotti trades himself, or we trade pieces of her. You have 6 hours. Come alone to the address we send, or the girl starts losing fingers." Sharon's entire world collapsed inward, crushing into a singularity of pure terror. The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering on the hardwood floor. Her baby. They had her baby. Training kicked in through the panic. Years of emergency room experience teaching her to function when everything inside screamed to fall apart. She called 911 with robotic precision, giving the address, describing her mother's condition, requesting an ambulance. Then she was moving, running, grabbing her keys and purse, racing toward her car. Toward the hospital. Toward the one person who could get Susan back. Toward Gotti. Sharon burst into Gotti's hospital room without knocking, the door slamming against the wall hard enough to leave a dent. Gotti was sitting up in bed, still connected to monitors but looking stronger than 3 days ago. Detective Hayes stood beside him, holding what looked like legal documents, mid-argument about protective custody and federal investigations. Both men turned to stare at her. Sharon must have looked like a nightmare, wild-eyed, disheveled, her scrubs still bearing the faint bloodstains from checking her mother's wound. "They took her." Sharon's voice came out strangled, barely human. She thrust her phone toward Gotti with a trembling hand. "They took Susan." Everything changed in Gotti's eyes. The cold calculation that had made him Chicago's most feared boss for 2 decades evaporated instantly, burned away by something far more primal. Raw terror flooded his features, the kind of fear that comes from suddenly having something to lose after years of being invincible. Where? One word. Flat. Deadly. Sharon showed him the photograph, unable to look at it again herself. Gotti's hands, still bearing 4 puncture marks and surgical bruises, took the phone with surprising gentleness. He stared at the image of his daughter for 3 seconds that stretched into eternity. Then his eyes narrowed, scanning the background visible through the SUV windows. Sharon watched recognition flash across his face. "Old warehouse on the south side," Gotti said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Former meatpacking district. Calabrese territory. I know the building." Detective Hayes moved closer, his cop instincts overriding whatever argument he'd been making moments before. "Let me see." Gotti showed him the photo. Hayes's expression went grim. "It's a trap," the detective said bluntly. "They want you to come alone so they can finish what they started. Vincent, you're barely out of surgery. You can't even walk without assistance. This is what they want." "I know it's a trap." Gotti's voice was eerily calm now, the kind of calm that preceded extreme violence. "Then we do this smart," Hayes continued, pulling out his own phone. "We can coordinate with SWAT, get tactical teams in position, use thermal imaging to locate the child. We extract her safely, minimize casualties." "How long?" Gotti interrupted. "What? How long to coordinate with SWAT? Get your tactical teams in position. Plan your smart extraction." Hayes hesitated. 2, maybe 3 hours if we move fast." The text said 6 hours. Sharon's voice cracked. "Or they start cutting off her fingers." Gotti ripped the 4 from his arm in one violent motion. Blood dripped onto the white hospital sheets, onto the floor, bright red and immediate. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, his face going pale with pain but his jaw set with absolute determination. "Boss, you can't." Polly materialized from the corner where he'd been standing guard. "That's my daughter." Gotti stood, swaying slightly but remaining upright through sheer force of will. He looked at Detective Hayes with eyes that had ordered countless deaths and never flinched. "I'm not waiting." Gotti orchestrated one final play from his hospital bed, the kind that either ended with victory or total annihilation. No middle ground. No retreat. He made calls to every family he'd ever done business with across 3 states, his voice hoarse but carrying the weight of 2 decades of earned respect and fear. The Benedetti family in Milwaukee. The Russo crew in Detroit. The Torino organization downstate. Even the New York families who'd watched his rise with cautious approval. The message was simple, delivered with brutal clarity. Someone took my 4-year-old daughter. Whoever has Susan Malone is about to face the full weight of Chicago's underworld united against them. This ends tonight. He called in decades of favors, pulled strings he'd been saving for catastrophic emergencies, made promises that would cost him territories and profit margins he'd fought wars to secure. None of it mattered. Only Susan mattered. But Gotti didn't wait for backup. Against medical advice that bordered on begging, against Detective Hayes's increasingly desperate warnings about bleeding out and post-surgical complications, against every tactical consideration that screamed this was suicide, Gotti walked out of Chicago Memorial Hospital wearing borrowed clothes over bandages still seeping blood. Polly and 3 loyal soldiers, men who'd followed him for years, who'd kill or die on his command, flanked him as they left through a service exit to avoid hospital security. Sharon tried to follow, but Gotti stopped her with a look. "You stay here. If this goes wrong..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Someone needs to survive for her. They arrived at the warehouse just before midnight. The building loomed against the Chicago skyline like a tombstone. Massive, abandoned, a relic from the city's meatpacking past. Shattered windows gaped like empty eye sockets. Graffiti covered brick walls. The surrounding lots were empty wastelands of industrial decay, cracked asphalt and rusted chain-link fencing. Perfect place for an execution. Gotti's chest screamed with every breath, every step sending knives of agony through his healing wounds. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. But he kept his face impassive, his stride steady. Never show weakness. That lesson had been beaten into him as a teenager and reinforced with blood ever since. "Boss, at least take a piece," Polly said quietly, offering a concealed Glock. Gotti shook his head. "They said unarmed. They have my daughter. I follow their terms." He walked through the warehouse's rusted entrance alone, leaving Polly and the soldiers positioned outside as insurance. The interior was cavernous and dark, illuminated only by portable work lights that cast harsh shadows across concrete floors stained with decades of blood. Animal and human both. Frank Calabrese waited in the center of the space like a king on a throne made of violence. He was a stocky man in his 50s, expensive suit tailored to hide the bulletproof vest underneath, graying hair slicked back with enough product to survive a hurricane. 8 armed men surrounded him. Professional soldiers, not street thugs. Each held automatic weapons with the casual competence of men who killed for a living. And Frank held Susan by the arm, his meaty hand wrapped around her small bicep hard enough to leave bruises. The little girl was crying, tears streaming down her face, her voice cracked from screaming. "Mommy! I want my mommy!" Gotti's heart shattered. Every instinct screamed to rush forward, to tear Frank apart with his bare hands, to die protecting his daughter. But rushing in would get Susan killed. So he walked forward slowly, hands visible and empty, playing the game. "Let her go, Frank." Frank Calabrese's laugh echoed through the warehouse, cruel and triumphant. He pressed a chrome-plated pistol against Susan's temple. The little girl whimpered, trying to pull away, but Frank's grip was iron. "You cost me 6 years of profit, Gotti," Frank said, his voice tight with rage barely held in check. "You took my territory on the south side, the gambling operations my father built from nothing. You killed my nephew Dominic in that restaurant hit last summer. You destroyed my heroin distribution network and gave it to the Russians." The gun pressed harder against Susan's head. The little girl's eyes squeezed shut. "Now you're gonna watch me take everything from you before you die," Frank continued. "Starting with this little bastard. Then I'll find your ex-wife. Then I'll burn down every operation you ever built. They'll forget Vincent Malone ever existed." Gotti's voice came out eerily calm despite the terror and rage coursing through him like gasoline waiting for a match. "You touch one hair on her head, Frank, and every family from here to New York will hunt you to extinction." He took another step closer, ignoring the 8 guns tracking his movement. "She's an innocent," Gotti continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "She's 4 years old. She's off limits by every code we live by. The old codes, the ones your father taught you. You kill a child, and you're not a soldier anymore. You're just a monster. And monsters get put down." Frank's laugh was uglier this time, more desperate. "Your code. You've been breaking codes for years. You partnered with Russians, with Mexicans, with anyone who'd increase your margins. You killed made men without proper authorization. You're no better than. Are you my daddy?" Susan's small voice cut through everything like a knife through silk. The little girl had opened her eyes and was staring directly at Gotti, tears still streaming down her face, but her amber eyes, his eyes, locked onto him with desperate hope. The warehouse went completely silent. Gotti felt tears burn his own eyes for the first time in 20 years. He'd ordered executions without flinching. He'd watched men beg for their lives and shown no mercy. He'd built an empire on fear and never once regretted the cost. But looking at his 4-year-old daughter, held at gunpoint because of his choices, because of his life, because of everything he'd become, something inside him broke apart and reformed into something different. "Yeah, sweetheart." His voice cracked. "I am. Mommy said my daddy was a hero who had to stay away to keep me safe," Susan whispered. And in that moment, Vincent "Gotti" Malone made the only choice that mattered. "Frank, you want me? Take me. Let the girl go. This ends with me." Frank Calabrese stared at Gotti for a long moment, calculating odds, weighing options, reading the desperation in his enemy's eyes. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that preceded murder. "You think I'm stupid." Frank's grip tightened on Susan, making her whimper. "The moment I let her go, your boys outside open fire. No. Here's what's gonna happen. You kneel, put your hands behind your head, and watch me put a bullet in her first. Then you die knowing you couldn't save her." "Frank." "Kneel." Gotti's knees hit the concrete, the impact sending agony through his healing wounds. Blood seeped through his borrowed shirt. His hands went behind his head. Submission. Surrender. Everything he'd never shown in 20 years of ruling Chicago. "Good," Frank said, pressing the gun harder against Susan's temple. "Now watch." The warehouse exploded into chaos. Windows that had been empty suddenly filled with red laser dots painting every Calabrese soldier. Doors that had been closed burst open with tactical precision. Flashbangs detonated, turning the cavernous space into thunder and lightning. "FBI, drop your weapons." Detective Hayes's voice boomed through a megaphone, backed by a tactical team in full body armor. Sharon had followed them after all, had gone straight to Hayes the moment Gotti left the hospital, had given the detective everything he needed to coordinate an emergency response. But it wasn't just cops. Through the smoke and confusion, Gotti saw them. Soldiers from 5 different crews pouring through every entrance. The Benedetti family from Milwaukee, recognizable by their black leather jackets. The Russo crew from Detroit, moving with military precision. Even representatives from the New York families, men who'd flown in on private jets for this single operation. Every family Gotti had called was here, honoring the code Frank Calabrese had violated. "You don't touch the children." "What they?" Frank spun, trying to track multiple threats simultaneously, his gun swinging away from Susan for just a second. Gotti moved. 20 years of violence had taught him to recognize the moment, the single second when everything hinged on action. He exploded upward despite the screaming protest from his chest, tackling Frank Calabrese with the full weight of his body. They crashed to the concrete together, Gotti's hands clawing for the gun. Susan tumbled free, scrambling away on hands and knees. "Run!" Gotti screamed at his daughter. "Run!" Frank's fist connected with Gotti's wounded chest. White-hot agony. Gotti's vision went dark at the edges, but he held on, both hands wrapped around Frank's wrist, fighting for control of the gun. Around them, the firefight was brutal and brief. Calabrese soldiers, outnumbered and outgunned, went down under overwhelming force. The families weren't there to arrest anyone. They were there to send a message written in blood and gunpowder. Frank's finger found the trigger. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the confined space, a thunderclap that silenced everything else. Gotti felt the impact, not in his chest this time but lower. Abdomen. The bullet punched through muscle and tissue, a burning path of destruction. His second gunshot wound in a week. Gotti's grip on Frank weakened. His vision blurred. Blood spread across his shirt in an expanding crimson stain. But Polly was there. A single shot. Precise. Professional. Frank Calabrese's head snapped back, and he collapsed onto the concrete, his gun clattering away. "Boss!" Polly dropped to his knees beside Gotti, pressing hands against the abdominal wound. "Stay with me. Medic. We need a medic." Through the chaos and smoke, Sharon ran in. Not toward Gotti, toward Susan, who was curled in a ball near a support column, sobbing. Sharon scooped her daughter up, holding her tight, checking for injuries with the efficient precision of her medical training. "Mommy." Susan buried her face in Sharon's neck. The bleeding man. He saved me, Mommy, he's bleeding again. Susan's voice cut through Sharon's relief and terror. The little girl was staring past her mother at Gotti, who lay in an expanding pool of blood, Polly desperately trying to keep pressure on the wound. Sharon looked at Gotti. Their eyes met across the warehouse floor. She could walk away, take Susan and disappear. Let the man who'd broken her heart bleed out the same way he'd made so many others bleed. But Susan was reaching toward him, crying, "Help him, Mommy. Please." Sharon made her choice. She carried Susan over to Gotti's side, kneeling in his blood. Susan's small hand reached out, touching Gotti's face with the fearless innocence of childhood. "You saved me," Susan whispered. "You're my daddy and you saved me." Gotti tried to smile through the pain. "Always. Gonna protect you, sweetheart." Paramedics are 2 minutes out. Detective Hayes shouted, coordinating with tactical teams securing the warehouse. Sharon pulled off her jacket, wadding it up and pressing it against Gotti's abdomen above Polly's hands. "Don't you dare die," she said, her voice fierce. "Don't you dare leave her now." Gotti's hand found Susan's, his large fingers wrapping around her tiny ones. "Not going anywhere." 3 days later, Gotti woke in the ICU to the familiar rhythm of hospital monitors. His wrists were handcuffed to the bed rails. Standard procedure for criminals under arrest. Every part of his body hurt, but he was alive. Detective Hayes sat in the visitor's chair, looking exhausted but grimly satisfied. A manila folder rested on his lap, the same one he'd shown Gotti before, but thicker now, more official. "Vincent Malone," Hayes said. "Welcome back to the land of the living." Gotti's voice came out as a rasp. "Where's Susan?" "Safe. With her mother in the pediatric wing. She's got some bruises, nightmares probably, but she'll recover." Hayes paused. "Frank Calabrese is dead. 7 of his soldiers are in custody. The Calabrese family is finished." "Good." Hayes opened the folder, pulling out documents with official DOJ letterhead. "I have a deal for you. Final offer. Take it or spend the rest of your life in federal prison." "I'm listening. Full immunity and witness protection in exchange for testimony against every remaining family in Chicago. You give us the entire infrastructure. Money laundering operations, corrupt officials, distribution networks, everything." Hayes leaned forward. "You dismantle what you built, Vincent. You burn it all down. And you walk away from this life completely. New identity. New city. New name. You can never come back to Chicago, never contact your crew again, never touch organized crime." Hayes's voice softened slightly. "But you'll be alive. And if Sharon agrees, you could be in your daughter's life." Gotti looked toward the window. Through the glass, he could see into the adjacent waiting area. Sharon sat with Susan in her lap, helping the little girl color in a princess coloring book. Susan was smiling, actually smiling, after everything she'd been through. Resilient. Strong. Just like her mother. For 20 years, Vincent Gotti Malone had chosen power. He'd chosen the empire over everything. Over Sharon, over happiness, over the possibility of a normal life. He'd built a throne made of fear and sat on it alone, convinced it was the only thing that mattered. He'd been willing to die for that throne just days ago. But looking at his daughter through that window, watching her laugh at something Sharon said, seeing the life they'd built without him, a good life, a safe life, Gotti finally understood what real power was. It wasn't fear. It wasn't territory or money or respect earned through violence. It was being the man that little girl thought he was. The hero who stayed away to keep her safe. Except now, he had a chance to be that hero by staying. "Where?" Gotti asked. Hayes consulted the folder. We're thinking Oregon. Small town, quiet. You'd work construction, maybe landscaping. Regular job, regular life. And Sharon. That's up to her. She's not under arrest. Her testimony about the Delgado murder isn't needed anymore given everything else we have. She can choose to relocate with you or stay in Chicago. Hayes closed the folder. But Vincent, if she does agree, you need to understand something. You don't get to be Gotti anymore. You're just a father. Just a man. No power, no empire, no respect earned through fear. Gotti looked at Susan again. She was showing Sharon her coloring page, proud of staying inside the lines. When do I sign? Hayes produced a pen. Vincent Gotti Malone signed away his empire. His name, his entire identity. 20 years of building power, gone with a signature. He'd never felt more free in his life. Through the window, Susan looked up as if sensing something. Her amber eyes, his eyes, met his gaze. She waved, a small, tentative gesture. Gotti waved back with his handcuffed hand. And for the first time since that night in the emergency room, since seeing his daughter for the first time, since learning the truth he'd been too blind to see, Vincent Malone smiled. Not the cold smile of a predator. The broken, hopeful smile of a father. Thanks for watching till the very end. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be dropping another unforgettable story tomorrow, so make sure you don't miss it.